Haidari, who is the program editor of TRT World's current affairs show Bigger Than Five. He's also a political analyst on Iraq, and he joins us here in the studio. Aws, really great to have you with us. You know, these protesters don't show any signs of abating at this point. What are protesters continuing to demand from the government?
Well, I think the protesters began as a general anger with the government for the lack of services, lack of jobs. But the movement quickly morphed into a much larger grassroots protest movement, and probably the biggest anti-government protest movement in Iraq's modern history. At this point, I think that the protesters really have a few main demands. The first one is the immediate resignation of the government. The second one is they want a new political system. They feel like the political system in Iraq, which is a parliamentary system, has failed them, and they want to move to a presidential system where it's very clear who they pick to lead their country. They also want early elections. They want to start all over again. They want an end to the violence. I mean, if you look at today, just today in Basra, there were 10 protesters that were killed and 250 injured. The number has reached over 260 across the country and thousands injured. They also want an independent investigation into who's doing the killings. There's a lot of conflicting reports as to why this is happening, and they want those people to be held accountable. They also want a restoration of the internet services. A lot of my friends in Iraq, I can't even get a hold of them most of the time. Since October 1st, the internet has been mostly cut. Only sometimes they would get it back. And basically, one of the last things that they want is the end to foreign meddling in their country. Whether it's through Iran, Saudi Arabia, the US, they want that to be done.
So what has been the government response? Why no resignation?
So I think here we have to sort of unpack a little bit of what's going on. In the eyes of the Prime Minister, he's been saying things like, I'm willing to resign, but I want the resignation to A, happen in a constitutional fashion, and B, I want there to be a plan. I don't want to just resign without a plan. So in his position, there are constitutional ways where this can happen. The rest of the other parties in parliament can pass a no confidence vote, and then that would result in the fall of the government and then an early call for the elections. The Prime Minister feels that if he were to resign without a plan, there would be a state of emergency government. And a state of emergency government under the Iraqi constitution cannot do much. They cannot pass laws, they cannot introduce new legislations, they cannot make amendments to the constitution. So it would be really, in his point of view, not a very good solution. Now, in the eyes of protesters, they feel like this is the same old overpaid, underperformed politicians who are sticking to their seats and holding on to power and not listening to the demands of the protesters. Now, the Prime Minister has come out and said, we're going to create an independent committee that will investigate corrupt politicians and sort of hold them accountable. And he's also promised stipends for the poor and more jobs. But I think a lot of the protesters have heard this over and over since 2003, and they simply don't believe it.
So you mentioned that one of the protesters' demands, Iraqis are sick of foreign involvement. How has Iran complicated this process?
Well, Iran actually has become at the forefront of why these protesters have been angry. There are many political parties in Iraq that have strong allegiances to Iran. And actually, some of these parties have been preventing the resignation of the Prime Minister. There were reports just a few days ago that Qasem Soleimani, the famous Revolutionary Guard, who's been involved a lot in the region, you hear his name in the news, has been in the green zone meeting with certain politicians and basically pushing for the Iraqi government to take measures to end these protest movement. You're also talking about militias. I mean, there are so many different militias in Iraq. Some of them have very clear allegiances to Iran, others not so much. But these militias have even been accused of killing some of these protesters. And let's not forget, serious economic ties. Iran and Iraq. Iran receives almost $14 billion annually from economic ties with Iraq. This isn't something that they're willing to let go very easily. So Iran has been at the forefront, but I think it's important to note that a lot of Iraqis have also been saying that they don't want any foreign intervention, whether it's from Saudi Arabia or Iran. They want a new Iraq. They want it to be guided by their will and by their needs.
Well, Aws, this is exactly the sort of in-depth analysis that you guys always showcase on Bigger Than Five. We really appreciate you coming on to news and breaking down that for us. Thank you.